You are listening to a message from Crosspoint Church. For additional information, please visit our website at crosspoint.family. We hope you enjoy today's message.
As we move along in our series of Advent, we're looking at this topic, this idea of hope, and I just want to say this will serve us so well to take hold of this. This concept of hope is so crucial to who we are as humanity, as human beings made in God's image. We are hope-oriented people. Like that's part of the DNA and wiring of who God has made us to be. And boy, when we get this mixed up, when we lose sight of what the substance of hope really is, we get in trouble. And so this morning, I am trusting this will be just a beautiful time to open up something that is so core to who we are. So I think sometimes we can have routines and things that we do in our lives, and we can just skip past it. We can not give it the space it needs. And when you hear about like the lamb will lay down with the wolf, and the bear and the cow will graze together, and then the baby will play with cobras, and you're like, what? The baby will stick his hand in the poisonous snake hole and like look for his pacifier, and they'll snuggle with him and cuddle him, and he'll come up and they'll be his play for like you're reading like, are you serious? Like I'm like, what are you talking about? Wolf and lamb and lions and cattle just playing and frolicking and high-fiving in the fields. I mean, these are things that are like just so crazy audacious. And this is part of the imagination that God has intended to give his people going back hundreds and thousands of years. That there is a day that is coming, that God is up to something, because their experience at the time was far different from that. All they knew, when Isaiah was written, was hardship and war and famine and like, am I going to get enough food to provide for my family today? It was a difficult and hard time to be alive. And then you see this word given that was so far from their experience. There's like this audacity, if we're really honest with ourselves, of these claims, of these things that God is holding in front of us to look towards. And so when we think about hope, this is so crucial for us. It is core to who we are to enable us to navigate the complexities and instabilities and difficulties of life. And that's why we see in Hebrews 6, verse 19, it says that we have this hope. This thing that Isaiah was talking about, like this day that is coming, this big idea, we have this hope, and it's like an anchor for the soul. This thing is firm and secure. We have something. We've been given something. God is offering something to us that in the craziness of life is like this anchor that holds still so that whatever storm, whatever struggle, whatever difficulty, it is firm and secure and holds us in those moments. This is what hope is meant to be. This is what hope is meant to do for us. It is meant to be like an anchor for us. It's sometimes in the New Testament, if we look at, Paul tries to boil down, to sum up, to like take all these big ideas and then throw them in like one sentence what they mean. And he does that sometimes. And he does that at the end of chapter 13 in 1 Corinthians, where he's talking about the importance of love and all these different things in our world. And then he just says, like these three things are going to be with us. These three things are core to a life with God. If you want to follow Jesus, these are the key ingredients to this life with God. And he says these are faith, hope, and love. And so hope is this thing that is so crucial and so core to life with God, a life of faith, that without it, we are missing the key ingredient to life. And so hope is a really, really big deal. But here's the challenge we have. Hope is not like just a concept. If we like uncover, like if we open up this topic of hope, it is highly psychological and emotional, isn't it? I mean, in what sentence do you often use hope? Isn't it like it's a sentence that is deep down, like this longing and desire for something, I hope that this happens. I really hope today that this goes the way I hope. I hope we win this game. Like there's these desires that are deep down core to who we are. When we use this word hope, it comes out in those sentences, right? I mean, how many times do we place hope in something to turn out, some sports team, some event, that it's all riding on that? And so I want to just define, what do we mean by hope this morning? Because there's a lot of different ways to look at it. We often throw around flippantly, I hope it doesn't rain today. I hope we see the sun sometime this week. These are things that we throw out. And so core to hope are two things, desire and expectation. So when we use this word hope, we need to think of it through the lens of the desires like under the surface, the deep desires that each of us have, that all of us live with. It's universal. And that something that we expect will fulfill those desires. And so that's what hope is I have this deep desire, and there's something that I'm expecting, I'm looking to, that I'm saying, this thing is going to be the answer to that deep desire in my life. And so for our younger people here, you might be here and you're like, man, that job one day, that career, it's going to be like the place where I get fulfilled. Or if I just make that team, if I just get on this thing, if I just look to that, my hope and expectation is once I have that, life is going to be great. Or it might be that relationship, or, for if you're single this morning, for some of us, like that season of waiting and looking, like if when I get that person, meet that person in my life, my expectation is my life there'll be a fulfillment, there'll be this thing that I experience that will be all that I hope it to be. Or, changing careers or whatever, like we're looking, and that is a seed of desire that really is what we mean when we mean by hope. And so the two different Greek Hebrew translations of hope, very different than how we use it today. Greek, the word is elpis, and it means strong expectation. And so the literal translation of the word hope that we use in our Bibles is this strong, like secure expectation that this is going to go, like this is it. This thing is going to be the thing that matters in my life. The Hebrew word tikva that literally means strong rope. This thing that's like secure, solid, going to be there for me. This thing is going to be what gets me through. In the Midwest, when storms would come, it was so crazy, especially out over the plains, that to go from your house to like your barn where you had cattle, you literally like could not see from one to the other. It might be 100 yards apart. And there were tragic stories of farmers who would go and check on their cattle, make sure they had food for the night, water, the things they need. They would go to the barn, feed them, and then on their way back to the house, like 100, 200 yards away, they would get lost in the blizzard, freeze, and die just outside of their homes. And so what they would do is they would get a rope they would attach and tie from the house to the barn. And so in those blizzards, in those crazy times, their hope, their expectation was, this line here that I follow will get me to where there is safety and warmth and where I need to be. Without this, I will die. And that's kind of the meaning of the Hebrew word of hope, is like, it is this lifeline that I'm looking to and holding to, believing that this will come through for me and get me where I need to go. And so Spurgeon says it this way: hope itself is like a star, not to be seen in the sunshine of prosperity, and only to be discovered in the night of adversity. How many of you know, like in those dark moments, hope is everything? Where we place our hope, what we think about hope, what we're hoping in, is really what sustains us often through difficult and dark times. And so here's our challenge. And this morning, I want to walk us through just recognizing the wrong places we place our hope. And we're just going to get honest with ourselves this morning. And so there was a professor wrote a book. Andrew Delblanco is his name. His book is called The Real American Dream, A Meditation on Hope. And so he traced hope through the history of the Americas. And so going back to the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, as he investigated and did research, and his summary was this, that in the 18th century, America, the hope America had, generally speaking, culturally speaking, was a belief in God. that whether they were Christian or not, there was this underlying reality that most people carried. And what they did is they had a hope in God, that there is this being, this creator, and that he sustains things and he holds things together. And generally speaking, culturally, a couple hundred years ago, that was the general feel of the time here in America. And then he traced how in the 19th century that hope in God moved and transitioned to a hope in nation. That as a country, like our hope is in this American experiment, that if we can like together come together as a society, as a people, we can make this great and awesome and beautiful city on a hill that would be the shining democracy for the whole world. And so hope was transferred from God to nation, where many people in our country have this sense of like, this we're living in this moment. This is a special place. And by putting our hope in this place, it will come through for us. And then the subtle shift in the 20th century, where we see that hope moved from America as a nation under God to the nation itself, and then ultimately to self. And so the main hope of our nation that came through during this time period was our hope would be in a happy, fulfilled life. Self-realization. That as we find ourselves, as you think about what you need and want, and that is the most driving force of your life, self became the source of hope of our nation here. And in his summary, what he came out with was, society cannot function like this. It'll literally tear itself apart. We need something bigger, more important, to bind us together. And so he traces hope as a cultural problem. Like as a society, we have wrong hopes that is tearing us from the inside out. And so here's what we have to reckon with, church. We have these deep desires, all of us do, and we set our expectations on things that we believe will satisfy those desires. And so the challenge we have is our desires are insatiable and unfulfillable. Enough will never be enough. And so I want to share just three things, three areas that we as a people, as a culture, generally speaking, this is the source in one of these categories of where we often put our hope. And this is part of just the brokenness that we see playing out in our world today. The first is this. For many people, the source of their hope is, and what I'm sharing this morning has been contributed much by Tim Keller, who does an incredible job. I'll share an article he written on this topic. The source of our hope is people thinking that it is still out there in things. And so this often plagues young people, that there's this belief, this fundamental thing that says, like, out there one day I will experience the deep desire that's in my heart that I'm longing to see. And so people who do this, who think that it's still out there in things, what it means is there's a confidence that I will later on be satisfied. Like later on one day when I graduate college, when I graduate high school, one day my thing will arrive. This situation will come through for me. And it's helpful to get through dissatisfaction now. But the reality is, the older you get, the more you realize that that thing never comes. And so there are people who live with this expectation that it's out there, I'm going to find it, it's going to come, career, people, relationship, whatever, you name it, one day I will have it. These kind of people also would say that later in life, as that never happens, this kind of person who never achieves that thing that they're looking for, this person is often a very bitter person. So when you come across a bitter person in your relationships in life, often the root of that bitterness is they had a longing, a desire for a thing. It never happened. They never got it. And there's just a bitterness around life. Often these people are filled with self-hate because they look at themselves and say, man, I blew it. I made a bad decision. I chose this person. I chose this career. Whatever failure, they're looking at themselves as the reason for not achieving, not getting that thing that they were longing and expecting and hoping would come in their life. It's funny, a lot of social activists are actually this way. If you look at a lot of like the things that are happening, like ruining Picasso paintings, or was it Van Gogh or Picasso? Van Gogh. A good throwing like soup or paint, like there's this like bitterness, there's this anger, and it's like, man, like the world didn't turn out the way I wanted it to be. And so I'm gonna start finding fault with why that is, and then I'm gonna like just throw my like vitriol on things. And we see this playing out at all levels. Bitterness, rage, and much that is rooted, if you got to the thing under the thing, it's that, oh, that thing I desired and longed for, it never happened, never came. I missed it. The second situation, so there's people who think it's still out there in things, that's where their hope lies. And then there's also people who got the things they thought was it, and it wasn't it. So there's people who have achieved, there's people who have arrived, there's people who they thought like one day if I meet this person, like this will be like the best thing ever and I will be so fulfilled and happy. And they get that person and they're like, man, this person is not the answer to all that I thought and hoped life would be. Actually, I can't stand the person. Actually, that person annoys the heck out of me. And they just get to a place where I need something else. And so that happens often in career, right? We thought this career, this thing, this job would be like the thing that like, once I get that, it's there and I get it, and it's not what I hoped it would be. And so let me find something else, another thing, another spouse, another career, another group of friends that will hopefully answer that big question. People who get the things and realize it isn't in the things, they also can really begin to spiritualize life. And so these are people who work for causes, social justice. These are people who like thinking, okay, I got it. It wasn't what I was, so I'm just gonna like do good and be like this really great person. Hopefully that will somehow get it. Meditation, yoga, that kind of like life of if I can just get calmed and peace is often rooted in a dissatisfaction with the things that they thought would be the thing. This is people who just try to become a better person. If I just work on me. Do we hear that often? I just need to get more time for me. Like, I just got to work on me. If I do that, often it is rooted in a hope that has been disappointed, a hope that has never been found. And so there's people today who think that their hope is in the thing to come. There's people today who have experienced the thing that they thought was the thing, and it hasn't turned out to be. And those people often can be very despairing. Has it ever been like so bizarre to you to see people who have like everything, and then you see them like take their life? And you're like, why? Like, why would you do that? You have like the world at your fingertips, and you hear stories of like deep, dark depression that different stars or celebrities or business moguls or you name it, like you hear about like all these incredible musicians that take their life at the like height of their career. Like, this is everything. You are filling stadiums. People are singing your songs. And they come to a place to realize that that thing they thought that would be it when they got there, it wasn't it. People who get there and realize it isn't all it was meant to be, these people also harden themselves. And so when you meet people, I don't know if you meet these like real cynical, really like hardened people who are just bitter, people who like condescend to you if you're like a hopeful person. They're like, oh, one day you'll get it. One day you'll learn that life sucks. Like one day it's okay. You know, I get around people like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, you are such a buzzkill. Like, who wants to be around you? Like, and that is the tragic reality is that when hope dies, we become less human. Like, we lose a part of us that God intended. And so the third kind of person, the source of hope, this is someone who, through narrative and movies and art, they try to find their meaning and significance in those things. And so if you look at like the craziness around like the Marvel movies, if you look at just the I'm a Lord of the Rings fan, so I'm just going to say this. Man, we can geek out in ways that are so dorky. I am like on YouTube watching videos on what would have happened if Sauron would have gotten the ring. What would have happened if Gandalf would have done this? And I'm like, this is so amazing. Oh my gosh. This is all make believe. Like, this is some dude spending like hundreds of hours thinking about this and then making YouTube channels talking about, well, what if Morgoth would have defeated the Valar and the Greyhavens? Who's tracking with me right now? You're loving this, right? Awesome. My goodness. Can we get lost in story and narrative? And so part of another like way that we deal with hope is that we suspend belief and we enter in these stories that we wish would never end. I'm just going to get vulnerable with you. I've had moments where I've read just incredible stories and I've closed the book and I've cried. And I've cried because I was so sad it was over. And I felt like these became my friends. And there's these stories that we can enter into that are beautiful, that we never want to end, that we want that for ourselves. The hero, the love unparted, the timeless, like living out like forever and ever. And I would say more and more as a culture, we move towards this because we have lost something deeper in our life, and this touches that deep seed, that deep place of desire. And so we can give ourselves to narrative. We can get by with it. Life is dark, life is hard, so if I can escape to this world, I would say, I think a lot of gamers today, a lot of people who just play hours and 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 hours on video games, I think part of that, I just want to share this with you, not to shame you, but there is a longing for significance and something deep desire that is in you that is good, that entering into that game, that thing, like it enters into this bigger narrative and bigger story that our hearts long for. But at the end of the day, it's not the real thing. And we can lose much of life looking for these stories to make sense with our own lives. And so, here's my question for us. How do we reckon with these deep desires that every one of us have? How do we reckon with that like God has put that there? There are these things deep within each of us that exist, that is God-given. And what do we reckon with this longing for significance and power or sex, money, like you name it, like just all these things that are in front of us that we can give our hearts to and our hopes for? What do we do with that? And this is what C.S. Lewis said. So he did a radio program in England and was talking about this idea of desire, this desire that really defines our hope. And here's what he says. It's a longer quote, so bear with me. The Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger, well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire, well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or to be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that country and to help others do the same. The reason why you have such powerful desires deep within you that cannot be satisfied here on this earth, The reason why all the different hopes we have that we place in things and future things and look forward to these things, the reason why those will never satisfy is because they were never meant to. They can't. And this is why we see in Jeremiah 17 how he tells God's people, proclaims this to them, and says, Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. All who forsake you, all who look and place their hope in other things will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water. What he is saying here is that for us to give our hopes, to place our hopes in these other things, our lives will be written in dust. They'll be gone. Because ultimately, the Lord alone is the spring of living water. And only when we drink from him, when we look to him, is he saying, this is where your hope, this is where your life, this is where your desires begin to make sense. In Ephesians 2, Paul gives a New Testament perspective in verse 12 on this reality. And I'm not sure if we had that scripture, but he says, remember to them, remember, like, guys, remember this. That at that time, at one time in your life, that might be still you here today, and that can change. But one time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel. You didn't belong to a people. You were foreigners of the covenant, of the promise. And he said, ultimately, you were without hope and without God in the world. And so, church, this morning, as we think about Advent and the significance of hope, Paul is saying, without Christ, without God, you were foreigners, you were excluded, you didn't belong, you didn't have a home, you didn't have a people, you didn't have a tribe. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you were without hope. And so any hope that we place on things, the scripture's telling us that it will fall short, it will disaster. We can put our desires and expectations on our kids if you have kids here today. My gosh, or our spouse, like the unhealthiness of putting that on people who can never be that. And so this morning, what is the hope that is an anchor for the soul? And so in Hebrews 6:19, he goes on to say this. We have this hope that we read this morning as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. And so what is this hope? Paul says this hope enters the inner sanctuary, into the Holy of Holies, into the presence of God himself, who dwells in inapproachable light. The one who, if we were to look on in our flesh today, if we were to look on his face, that we would die because his glory would be so great, it would be too much for us. Jesus, this hope, goes into that inner place, who is our forerunner. He has gone before us, and he's inviting us to follow him, to go with him, because Jesus has entered on our very behalf, that Jesus is the hope of our lives. He will never disappoint. He will never fail. He will never walk away. Like to put our hope, to put our desires, to put our expectations on things, to put those on Jesus. 1 Timothy 1, Paul says, Christ Jesus, our hope. It's not what he has done. It is Jesus himself is our hope. And so I want to just remind us of a few things about this hope, this Jesus. Because John 1:14 says, this hope, this Jesus took on flesh and became one of us. And John 1:4 says that the hope, Jesus revealed the life that we long for, but is out of our reach because of our sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says this hope, Jesus went to the cross to die a sinner's death in our place. In Hebrews 6:20, this hope, this Jesus enters this sanctuary where the life and glory of God dwells and invites us to put on his righteousness, to put on his clothes and follow him into those places, to go before the very throne of God with confidence. Colossians 2:15 says, this hope, this Jesus, he overcame Satan, sin, and death, so that through Jesus, through our hope that we share in that victory over those things. This hope, in Hebrews 13:5, welcomes us to a love that will never leave, never disappoint, or never fail. 1 Peter 4 tells us that this hope, this Jesus, meets us in our sufferings and sorrows, and he transforms us through them. Romans 8:28 says this hope, this Jesus, guides us in our trials because we know that he will ultimately work all things out for good. In Matthew 16, this hope, this Jesus satisfies our deepest longings for significance, for purpose, and meaning in this life. Church, we are a hope-oriented people. It is how God has wired us. It is who we are meant to be. It's interesting that, like in the very garden, at the very beginning in the creation story, when humanity fell, when everything fell apart, when we rebelled against God, turned our back on him, went our own way, God is pronouncing to him, here's a result of that. Like, curse has been brought into creation, into your life, and he's talking about the tragedy of that, of broken relationships and having to work and thorns and difficulty and all these things. And in the midst of all of that, he gives us hope that he will bruise your heel, but ultimately the Messiah, the one that will come, the hope of the world, will strike the head of the serpent and finish him and make right all that has been wronged in our world. And so this morning, my question for us is, where does our hope lie? For you, like this morning, as you sit here, what are the things that you are hoping in? What are you looking to? Is it so often, I think for me, my hope is like, if this person would just change, right? Like if they would just be different, if they would just understand how much they're hurting me or people, if they would just get it, gosh, things would be so much better. And then before we know it, we can put like that deep desire, this expectation that everything's riding on this person and this thing coming through the way that I hope it to be. And church, I just want to say that even if that does change, even if that does happen, you will find something else to hope and long for. Here's like my materialism this time of year. Holy cow. It is crazy how you hear like something about shoes. Oh, shoes. I need shoes. Like you just hear a phrase and all of a sudden it's like, if I just have this thing, if I just get this, man, it will be so much better. And we just go, and when we get that thing, it's the next thing, and the next thing, the next thing. And this morning, I just want to save us from all that heartache and grief. I want to save us from being a bitter, angry people who like just harden ourselves to God and to life. That happens when we put our hope in this Jesus. So hope is talked about in Isaiah 40. There's this future orientation to hope, that we with expectation look to Jesus. And in Isaiah 40:31, he tells us, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. How many people here this morning would say, gosh, I wish that was me? Like, oh, for me to be a person who will soar on wings like eagles, who will run and not grow weary, who will walk and not be faint. This is for those who hope in the Lord. So this Advent, this season, as we look to Christ coming in the flesh and celebrate and wonder at what it means that Christ came for us, and as we ultimately still long for his return, where he will make it all right one day again. As we sit in between these two events, this hope that has come and this hope that is coming, let us this season renew our strength. Let us soar on wings like eagles. Let us run and not grow weary. And so if you're tired this morning, if you're exhausted, if you are having trouble with sleeping, if you are just stressed and there's things that are completely stressing you out, this morning, I just want to invite us. If we turn to Him, put our hope in Him and not in these things, regardless of what happens, we have this anchor for the soul that holds us firm and secure. This is the good news. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ. A hope secure.